The wind had a way of telling secrets in that part of Texas low, restless, and always moving like it was looking for something it could never find. Dust curled along the empty road leading to the Black Ridge Ranch, a vast stretch of land owned by one man who rarely spoke to anyone unless it was necessary. That man was Ethan Cole, a wealthy ranch owner with a reputation for being fair in business, but distant in everything else. People in town said he didn't trust easily. Others said he didn't care to. Either way, Ethan lived as if the world ended at the edge of his fences. That morning, he stood on the porch of the main ranch house, coffee in hand, watching the horizon blur under the rising sun. His workers were already out fixing fences and checking horses. Everything was normal, predictable, controlled, until it wasn't. A figure appeared on the road dot at first. Ethan thought it was a rider who had lost their way. But as the shape got closer, he realized it was a woman walking alone. No horse, no carriage. Just a small, worn suitcase dragging slightly in her hand, like it weighed more than it should. She stopped at the gate. Ethan didn't move. The woman lifted her head. Dust clung to the edges of her dark coat, and her hair had been tied back loosely. Those strands had already escaped into the wind. She looked exhausted, but not defeated. There was something steady in her posture, something that didn't match the uncertainty of her arrival. One of the ranch hands called out from the barn, "You expecting company, boss?" Ethan didn't answer. He walked down the steps instead, boots crunching against gravel as he approached the gate. The woman didn't step back. That alone caught his attention. "Lost?" he asked simply. Her voice came after a brief pause, calm but dry from travel. "No." That single word made the silence heavier. Ethan studied her carefully. She wasn't dressed like someone from around here. Her clothes were plain but well-made once, now worn from distance and hardship. Her hands had faint markswork, maybe struggle, maybe both. But her eyes were steady in a way that didn't fit someone asking for help. "What do you want?" he asked. She hesitated, just long enough for him to notice it wasn't an easy question for her. "Work," she said finally. "I can cook, clean, help on the ranch if needed." Ethan almost smiled, but didn't. "You walked all the way out here for work?" "I walked because I didn't have another option." That answer hung in the air longer than expected. Behind him, one of the ranch workers muttered, "We don't even know her name." Ethan heard it but didn't turn. "What's your name?" he asked. For a moment, she looked like she might refuse, like the question itself carried weight she didn't want to lift. But then she said it quietly. "Claire. Just Claire. No last name. No story. Nothing else." Ethan leaned slightly on the gate. "You understand this isn't a shelter. This is a working ranch." "I understand, and I don't hire people I don't know." A flicker passed across her face, not fear, not anger. Something closer to acceptance, like she had expected. This answer long before she arrived. She shifted her grip on the suitcase. "I can earn my stay," she said. "One day at a time if I have to." The ranch behind him was loud with morning activity, horses being saddled, wood being hauled, men calling out instructions. But between Ethan and this woman, everything felt unnaturally quiet. He should have said no. He usually did, but something about her didn't feel like the usual drifters who came begging for work and left by sundown. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't trying to impress him. She was simply standing there, as if waiting for life to either reject her again or finally allow her to stay. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Temporary," he said. "You work, you eat. You don't cause trouble, you stay." That should have been the end of it, but as he unlocked the gate and pushed it open, he noticed something subtle in her expression, relief, but not comfort, like survival was still something she didn't fully trust. Claire stepped inside the ranch grounds without looking back at the road, and as the gate closed behind her, Ethan had no idea that this moment, the decision to let a stranger stay, was going to change everything he thought he knew about his quiet, controlled life. The ranch didn't feel welcoming at first, not to Claire, and not to anyone who arrived there without a place already belonging to them. Black Ridge Ranch was too large for comfort and too quiet for ease. Wide fields stretched out like unfinished thoughts, and the distant sound of horses carried through the wind like echoes of a life that never paused. Claire stood just inside the gate for a moment longer than necessary, as if crossing it meant crossing into something she couldn't undo. Ethan Cole walked ahead of her without much ceremony. "Follow me," he said simply. No questions. No reassurance. Just direction. Claire picked up her suitcase and followed. The workers watched her as she passed. Some glanced briefly, others stared longer, but none spoke directly. She could feel their curiosity like heat on her back, but she didn't slow down. She had learned long ago that hesitation invited questions, and questions led to things she wasn't ready to answer. They reached the main yard, where tools were stacked and horses shifted in their pens. Ethan stopped near a wooden post and finally turned to face her fully. "You said you want work," he said. Double quotes, "Yes?" He studied her again, more carefully this time. Not in a way that was unkind, but in a way that measured risk. Ethan Cole was a man who weighed everything, people included. "I don't do charity," he added. "I didn't come for charity." That answer seemed to satisfy him more than any pleading would have. He nodded once, then gestured toward the ranch house. "There's a room out back. It's small, basic. You'll use it." Claire didn't react immediately. A room, that alone, felt like something fragile in her world, something temporary that could be taken back at any moment. "And the work?" she asked. Ethan glanced toward the barns. "Starts tomorrow. If you're serious, you'll learn fast." "I am serious," she said quietly. A pause followed. Not uncomfortable, but uncertain. The kind that happens when two people don't yet know what kind of distance to keep. One of the ranch hands finally stepped forward. A broad-shouldered man with sunburned skin and a skeptical expression. "Boss, we don't even know her," he said. "We got plenty of workers already." Ethan didn't look at him. "We don't have enough hands for the east fence repairs." "That's not what I meant," the man insisted. Ethan's voice stayed calm, but it ended the conversation anyway. "She works, or she leaves." That was it. Claire understood the structure immediately. No promises, no safety net. Only performance. It wasn't unfamiliar. Still, something about the way Ethan said it wasn't cruel. It was controlled. Like he didn't trust softness to survive long out here. Ethan motioned toward a smaller building behind the main house. "You can settle in. Food's in the kitchen when the bell rings." Then he turned away as if the matter was closed, but Claire didn't move yet. "Why did you let me in?" she asked. The question stopped him for a fraction of a second. Ethan didn't turn fully back. "Because you didn't ask me to save you." And with that, he walked away. The small room she was given was barely more than a shelter. A bed, a table, a window that looked out toward the open fields. But to Claire, it felt like more space than she had had in weeks. She placed her suitcase down carefully, as if sudden movement might break the fragile agreement she had just made, outside. The ranch continued its rhythm, boots on wood, distant shouting, horses shifting in their pens. Life here didn't pause for strangers, and neither did Ethan Cole. From a distance, Claire watched him move through the yard. He didn't waste words. When he spoke, people listened. When he didn't, they worked harder just to avoid his attention. There was something tightly controlled about him, not anger. Not warmth. Something in between, like he had learned to lock everything important behind a door and never open it again. Claire sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't walking. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. In motion, stillness felt unfamiliar. Her fingers rested on the edge of her sleeve where the fabric was worn thin from travel. She thought about the road behind her, the places she had passed through without staying, the faces she had avoided meeting for too long. She had told herself this ranch would be temporary too, but something about Ethan's eyes when he said you didn't ask me to save you stayed in her mind longer than expected. That wasn't kindness, Dot. It was recognition, Dot, and recognition she realized could be more dangerous than pity. Dot outside. The wind moved across the fields again, brushing against the wooden walls like it was testing how long everything would last. Claire exhaled slowly. Tomorrow, she would start working, and whether this place became another stop on her escape or something she could finally stand still in was no longer entirely in her control. The first few days at Black Ridge Ranch didn't bring comfort. They brought rhythm. Claire learned quickly that the ranch didn't adjust to people. People adjusted to it. Work began before sunrise, long before the heat settled over the fields. Horses needed feeding, fences needed checking, water troughs needed refilling, and nothing waited for hesitation. Ethan Cole watched everything without saying much. He didn't hover. He didn't instruct more than necessary. But he noticed, and Claire noticed that he noticed. On her second morning, she was already in the barn when most of the workers arrived. She had already started cleaning the stalls, moving with a steady pace that didn't invite interruption. One of the older ranch hands paused at the entrance, surprised. "You been up all night or something?" he asked. Claire didn't look up. Couldn't sleep. That was all she said. By midday, she was helping repair a section of fence along the east pasture. The work was physical, demanding, and under the sun that didn't seem to care how new she was to it. Still, she didn't slow down. She didn't complain. Ethan passed by once on horseback. He slowed slightly. Most newcomers struggled. They asked for breaks. They made mistakes. They gave excuses. Claire did none of that. But there was something about the way she moved that didn't match her effort, like she was working through something heavier than exhaustion. He didn't stop. He just watched for a moment longer than necessary, then rode on. By the third day, the workers had started adjusting their opinions. "She's quiet," one of them said at lunch. "Quiet's better than trouble," another replied. "But she's too quiet." That comment lingered. Claire heard them, of course. People always assumed silence meant weakness or secrets. But for her, silence was protection. Words had once cost her more than she could afford. So she kept her answers short and her focus steady. She cooked when asked, cleaned without being reminded, fixed small things others overlooked. She didn't try to be noticed, but she also didn't try to disappear. That balance unsettled people more than either extreme would have. Ethan began noticing details he didn't intend to. The way she checked every latch twice before leaving a barn. The way she always positioned herself near exits, without looking like she was avoiding anything. The way her gaze occasionally drifted toward the horizon, long, distant, like she was measuring how far she might need to go if she ever left in a hurry. She wasn't just working. She was preparing. For what? He didn't know. And he didn't ask. On the fourth evening, Claire finished her tasks later than usual. The sky had already turned a deep amber when she returned to the main yard, brushing dust from her sleeves. Ethan was there, reviewing a ledger on the porch steps. He didn't look up immediately. "You're not from around here," he said, still reading. It wasn't a question. Claire stopped a few feet away. "No." A pause. "Where are you from?" he asked. This time, she hesitated longer. Not because she didn't understand the question, but because she understood it too well. "Somewhere I'm not going back to," she finally said. Ethan finally looked up. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was something in her expression that wasn't dramatic or emotional. It was controlled, carefully contained. Like a door that had been sealed from the inside, Ethan closed the ledger slowly. "You don't have family?" he asked. The question was simple, but it landed heavier than intended. Claire shook her head once. That was all. No explanation followed, and somehow that silence said more than words could have. Later that night, Ethan stood alone near the edge of the ranch, looking out at the dark fields. The workers had gone to rest. The wind moved gently through the grass, carrying the sounds of a place that never truly slept. But his thoughts didn't match the calm of the land. Claire didn't fit the usual patterns of people who came looking for work. She wasn't desperate in the way he expected. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. And she wasn't asking for sympathy. She was carrying something. And whatever it was, she kept it tightly sealed behind her calm voice and steady hands. Ethan had seen hardship before. He had seen people break, run, and rebuild themselves. But Claire wasn't breaking. She was enduring. There was a difference, a strong one. He exhaled slowly, adjusting his stance as he looked back toward the ranch house. Her small room was lit faintly by a single lamp. She was still awake. So was he, and for reasons he couldn't yet explain, that fact stayed with him longer than it should have. The weather turned without warning. Out on the plains, storms didn't ask permission, they arrived. Like they owned the sky. By late afternoon, the wind had already shifted. It started as a low whisper through the grass, but by evening it had grown into something heavier, something restless. The ranch workers noticed it first. Horses grew uneasy in their stalls. Doors creaked harder than usual. Even the air felt charged, like the land itself was holding its breath. Ethan Cole stood near the barn, watching the horizon darken. "That's not a normal storm front," one of the workers muttered. Ethan didn't answer right away. He had seen enough Texas storms to know when nature was about to stop negotiating. "Secure everything," he said finally. "Now." The ranch snapped into motion. Gates were reinforced. Loose equipment was brought inside. Horses were calmed and guided into covered stalls. The sky, meanwhile, continued to darken like ink spreading across paper. Claire was in the storage shed when the first distant thunder rolled in. She paused, listening. It wasn't fear that made her still. It was recognition. Storms had a way of forcing memory to the surface, whether you wanted them or not. The wind picked up sharply, slamming against the wooden structures. Rain followed soon after, heavy and fast, turning dust into mud within minutes. Ethan's voice cut through the chaos. Inside, everyone inside the main house. Most of the workers rushed toward shelter. Claire followed, but slower, checking that the barn doors were secure before moving. That delay changed everything. A sudden gust slammed one of the side gates open, and a loose wooden panel from the barn roof tore free with a violent crack. Ethan saw it at the same time she did. "Move!" he shouted. Claire stepped back just in time as the panel crashed down, where she had been standing seconds earlier. For a brief moment, everything blurred: wind, rain, noise, movement. Then Ethan was there, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the main house. They ran through the storm together. The rain was sharp, almost blinding. The ground had turned uneven, slippery. Lightning flashed overhead, turning the world white for a fraction of a second at a time. They reached the porch and stumbled inside just as another wave of wind slammed against the structure. The door shut behind them with a heavy thud. Silence followed, but not the calm kind. The kind of silence that comes after something almost goes wrong. Inside the ranch house, the air was dim and warm. Lanterns flickered, casting uneven light across wooden walls. The storm outside made the entire building feel smaller, as if the world had shrunk to just what was inside those walls. Claire stood near the entrance, Catching her breath, her hair was damp. Her sleeves were soaked. But she didn't seem focused on discomfort. She was watching the door. Ethan noticed. "You're safe," he said simply. Claire nodded once, but didn't relax. Thunder rolled again, shaking the windows. One of the workers muttered from across the room, "That barn roof won't hold if this keeps up." Ethan didn't respond. Instead, he turned to Claire. "You were outside too long. You could have gone back earlier." It wasn't an accusation, just observation. "I was checking the gates," she said. "You should have left it to someone else." Claire looked at him directly for the first time since they'd come inside. It was loose. That was all. No justification. No defense. Just fact. Ethan studied her for a moment. "You don't take instructions easily," he said. A faint pause passed between them. "I take responsibility seriously," she replied. Something shifted in the room, not loud, not visible, but noticeable. In the way silence settled differently afterward. The storm outside intensified again, wind pressing hard against the walls. Ethan stepped toward the window, looking out. Claire remained still near the doorway. "You've seen worse storms?" he asked without turning. A long pause followed. "Yes," she said quietly. Ethan turned slightly at that, just enough to look at her, but she didn't elaborate, didn't offer a story, didn't invite questions, and somehow that made the answer heavier than if she had said nothing at all. Later that night, the ranch house became a shared shelter for everyone. Workers spread blankets, secured windows, and waited out the storm in uneasy rest, but Claire didn't sit down. She stayed near a side corner of the room, arms crossed lightly, listening to every sound outside. Ethan noticed again. "You can rest," he said. "I'm fine." That wasn't the question. A pause. Claire finally glanced at him. "I don't sleep well in storms." Ethan didn't respond immediately. Outside, lightning flashed again, briefly lighting the room in white. When it faded, his voice came quieter than before. "Neither do I." For the first time since she arrived at Black Ridge Ranch, Claire looked at him differently, not as an employer, not as a stranger, but as someone whose silence might not be empty after all. And outside, the storm kept moving across the land as if it too was searching for something it hadn't yet found. Morning arrived after the storm, like the world was pretending nothing had happened. The skies were still heavy, but the worst had passed. Mud clung to everything outside the ranch house fences, boots, wagon wheels, even the grass itself looked weighed down. Workers moved slowly, repairing damage in quiet coordination, as if speaking too loudly might bring the storm back. Inside the house, life had returned to routine, but something subtle had changed. Claire noticed it first in herself. She had slept little, not because of the storm anymore, but because of what came after it. The stillness, the shared space, the unexpected sentence Ethan had said. "Neither do I." It lingered longer than she expected. Now she was back in her small room behind the main house, preparing for another day of work. The air felt colder than usual, as if the storm had taken something from it and left behind an emptier version of the world. She stood near the small mirror above a wooden basin, adjusting her worn work clothes. They were practical, layered, sturdy, built for labor, but not comfortable after long days of movement. Her fingers paused at the fastening of an older underlayer she wore beneath her shirt for support. It was simple, not dramatic, but clearly something that had been repaired more than once during her travels. She exhaled softly and loosened it slightly, trying to ease the pressure from long hours of physical work. For a brief moment, the fabric slipped from its usual position as she adjusted it. Nothing improper, nothing revealing in a dramatic sense. Just a quiet human moment of discomfort being relieved after too many days of strain. Still, she froze. Not because of exposure, but because of memory. Moments like this had once been associated with places she no longer belonged to, with versions of herself she had worked hard to leave behind. Even small things like adjusting clothing in silence carried echoes of a past she refused to name. She quickly corrected it, steadying her breath. "Get through the day," she whispered to herself. That was her rule. Always forward, never backward. Outside, Ethan was already in the yard. He was reviewing damage reports with one of the foremen when he noticed movement near the back of the house. Claire stepped out, pulling her sleeves tighter against the wind. But she moved differently today, slightly slower, more contained. Ethan watched her briefly before turning back to the conversation, but something about her posture stayed in his mind longer than expected. She wasn't injured. She wasn't visibly struggling. But she wasn't entirely present either. Later that morning, Claire was assigned to help repair a section of fencing near the western pasture. The job required lifting, hammering, and stretching wire under tension. It was physical work that usually demanded full attention. But today, her focus slipped once or twice. Not enough for others to notice, but enough for Ethan, who passed by on horseback again. He slowed. "Claire," he called. She looked up immediately. "You're working slower," he said. "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." A pause passed between them. The wind moved across the field, pulling at loose strands of her hair. "I just didn't sleep much," she said. Ethan studied her for a moment longer than necessary. Then he nodded once. "Don't push yourself too hard today." It wasn't sympathy. It wasn't concern either. It was acknowledgement. And somehow, that felt more grounding than either of the other two would have. By midday, the sun had broken through the clouds, casting long light over the ranch. The storm damage was being repaired steadily, life returning to structure piece by piece. Claire worked quietly, focused again now, hands steady as she tightened wire along the fence posts. But Ethan noticed something else this time. She didn't fully relax even when she stopped working. Even when she stood still, her attention stayed alert, scanning, measuring, staying ready. It wasn't fear, it was habit. A learned instinct. When he didn't understand yet. Near the edge of the pasture, Ethan eventually dismounted and walked toward her. He didn't interrupt her work. He simply stood a few feet away until she noticed him. "You don't stop," he said. Claire looked at him. "There's always something to do." "That's not what I meant." Silence stretched briefly between them. Then he added, quieter, "You act like resting is dangerous." That statement made her pause. Her hands stopped moving. For a moment, she looked like she might deny it. But instead, she simply said, "Resting used to be when things went wrong." Ethan didn't respond immediately. The honesty in her voice wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was factual. And that made it harder to dismiss. He looked away briefly toward the horizon, then back at her. "Out here," he said, "you don't survive by staying tense all the time." A faint, almost unnoticeable reaction crossed her face, like she understood the words, but not the feeling behind them. As the day went on, Claire continued working, but more carefully now, as if aware she was being seen differently, even if she didn't fully understand why. And Ethan, for reasons he couldn't explain, found himself watching her less like an employee, and more like someone standing at the edge of something she didn't yet trust enough to step away from. The ranch settled into an uneasy calm after the storm, like a deep breath the land hadn't fully finished taking. Repairs were underway. Everywhere, broken fence lines were replaced. Barn roofs were patched. Life returned to motion, but nothing felt completely the same. Even the animals seemed slightly more alert, as if remembering something they couldn't explain. Claire worked through it all without complaint. But Ethan noticed she wasn't the same as before either. She still showed up early, still completed every task. still spoke only when necessary. Yet there was a subtle change in how she carried herself, less like someone trying to disappear and more like someone trying not to be seen too closely. That difference mattered more than it should have. It was late afternoon when Ethan found her near the equipment shed. She was lifting a heavy wooden beam with one of the workers, steadying it into place for a repaired structure. The task required coordination, timing, strength. Claire didn't hesitate. But as they set the beam down, her grip faltered for a fraction of a second. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but Ethan saw it. He was already walking toward them before he fully decided to. "Take a break," he said. Both Claire and the worker looked up. "I'm fine," she replied automatically. Ethan didn't argue. He simply stepped closer and took the end of the beam himself, finishing the adjustment with the worker. Then he turned back to her. "That wasn't a suggestion," he said quietly. The worker hesitated, then moved away, sensing the conversation wasn't meant for him. Claire wiped her hands on her sleeve. "I didn't drop it. I didn't say." "You did." A pause. The wind moved through the yard, carrying dust and the faint scent of wood and iron. Claire finally met his eyes. "Then what are you saying?" Ethan hesitated. That was rare. He was a man who usually spoke only when he already knew the answer. But this time, he didn't. "You don't need to prove you belong here every minute of the day," he said. Finally, something flickered in her expression, quick, almost invisible. "I'm not trying to prove anything," she said. Ethan studied her. "That's not what it looks like." Silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just heavy. The kind of silence that forms when both people are standing near something neither of them knows how to name yet. Later that evening, Claire was finishing her tasks near the barn when Ethan returned on horseback. He dismounted slowly, tying the reins to a post before walking toward her. The sun was lowering now, casting long gold across the fields. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan said, "You're still standing when everyone else is resting." "I finish what I start," she replied. "That's not the point." She straightened slightly. "Then what is?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the horizon where the sky was softening into dusk. "When people never stop," he said, "it usually means they're afraid of what happens when they do." The words weren't harsh, but they landed deeply. Claire turned her gaze slightly away, not because she was avoiding him, but because she was processing something she didn't want to name out loud. "I'm not afraid," she said, but there was a delay before she said it. A small one, the kind that didn't go unnoticed. Ethan nodded slowly, as if accepting the answer but not believing it completely. "I didn't say you were," he replied. That was worse, because it meant he was listening to what she didn't say. The ranch grew quieter as night approached. Workers drifted toward their rooms. Lanterns were lit. The wind softened. Claire stood near the barn entrance, watching the last light fade. Ethan stood a few feet behind her, not close enough to crowd her, not far enough to ignore her. "You could leave whenever you want," he said suddenly. That made her turn slightly. "I know," she replied. A pause. "Why haven't you?" he asked. It wasn't an accusation. It was a real question. And for once, Claire didn't answer. Immediately, her fingers tightened briefly at her side. Because the truth wasn't simple. Leaving was what she had always done. It was what kept her alive. But staying, even temporarily, felt like stepping into something she didn't fully understand yet. "I don't have anywhere else to go right now," she said finally. Ethan didn't respond right away. Then he said, "That's not the same as staying." Her eyes lifted slightly at that. And for a moment, neither of them spoke again. Because something unspoken had formed between them, not a promise, not a decision, not even an understanding. The ranch had finally begun to feel like a rhythm again. Not peaceful exactly, but stable. The kind of stability that comes from repetition. Horses fed at the same hours, fences checked in the same order, tools returned to the same hooks. Even the wind seemed to follow a pattern now, moving across the fields with less violence than before. Claire had become part of that rhythm without fully realizing it. She no longer hesitated when handed tasks. She no longer asked where things were. She already knew. And though she still spoke little, the workers had stopped questioning her presence. She was simply there. Ethan noticed that more than anyone, but he also noticed something else. She never fully relaxed, even when standing still. Even when the day was done. It was as if part of her always remained slightly turned toward the idea of leaving. It was mid-afternoon when the sound of hooves broke the usual calm. Not ranch horses. Different. Rhythm. Faster. Intentional. Ethan heard it first while reviewing repairs near the main gate. He paused immediately, eyes narrowing slightly. Two riders approached the ranch road. That alone wasn't unusual, but something about the way they rode was purposeful, direct. Ethan straightened. "Hold the gates," he called to one of the workers. Riders stopped just outside the main entrance. Dust settled slowly around them. Claire was nearby, carrying a small crate from the storage shed. She stopped the moment she saw them. She didn't move closer, but she didn't move away either. That alone changed the air. Ethan walked forward to meet them. The man at the front dismounted first. He was older, dressed neatly, but worn by travel. His eyes scanned the ranch before settling on Ethan. "Afternoon." The man said, "State your business." Ethan replied. A brief pause. Then the man's gaze shifted past Ethan toward Claire. Something subtle changed in his expression. Recognition. Claire's single quotes S grip tightened slightly on the crate. Not fear, but stillness. The man spoke again, slower this time. "We're looking for someone." Ethan didn't look back yet. "You won't find her here." The man exhaled lightly, almost like he had expected resistance. "Her name is Claire." That finally made Ethan turn his head slightly. Not fully, just enough to confirm what he already suspected from the shift in the air behind him. Claire hadn't moved, but she was no longer just a worker standing in the yard. She was someone with history, and history had just arrived at the gate. The second rider stayed on horseback, watching silently. The first man stepped closer. "She left without notice," he continued. "Family's been searching." The word family landed differently in the silence. Claire finally set the crate down carefully, not manicked. Panicked at control. Ethan looked back at her, then asking, just observing. She met his eyes briefly, and in that moment, he understood something he hadn't before. This wasn't just someone running from a difficult past. This was someone who had already made a choice to disappear from it. The man continued, "We're not here to cause trouble. We just need her to come back." Silence stretched. The wind moved lightly through the gate. Then Claire spoke. Her voice was calm but firm. "I'm not going back." That was it. No explanation. No argument. Just decision. The man frowned slightly. "Claire, I said no." Ethan noticed something then. Her voice didn't shake. But her hands were no longer idle. They were steady, but prepared, like someone who had already lived through the conversation before it ever happened. The man looked between her and Ethan. "You don't understand what you're walking away from," he said. Claire answered quietly, "I do." That was worse, because it meant she had already paid the cost. Ethan stepped slightly forward, not between them, but close enough to be present. "This is private land," he said evenly. "She works here. She stays if she chooses to. That's the end of it. The man looked at him sharply. You don't know her history. Ethan didn't blink. Doesn't matter. A pause. Then he added, she's not being taken from here. The words were calm, but final. Something in the man's expression shifted, not anger, but realization that this wasn't going to be solved by persuasion. Claire stood still through it all, but something in her posture had changed. Not fear, not relief, something more complicated, like she had expected this moment, but not expected someone to stand between her and it. The riders exchanged a look. Then the first man sighed. We'll come back, he said quietly. Ethan replied, don't. The man didn't argue. They turned back toward their horses, and just like that, they left. The sound of hooves faded down the road, swallowed by wind and distance. When silence returned, it felt different than before. Heavier, not empty, full. Claire didn't move immediately. Ethan didn't either. Finally, he spoke. You want to tell me what that was? She hesitated. For the first time since arriving at Black Ridge Ranch, her answer wasn't immediate. I didn't think they would find me here, she said quietly. Ethan nodded once. That wasn't my question. A pause. Claire looked toward the gate, then back at the land beyond it. I left, she said finally, because staying meant becoming someone I didn't want to be anymore. Ethan listened without interrupting. Then she added, softer, and I'm not going back to that. The wind moved again, but this time neither of them felt like it was pushing them apart, that it felt like something had finally been acknowledged. Not resolved. Not healed. Just seen. Night settled over Black Ridge Ranch, like a quiet verdict, the kind of night where the sky feels closer than usual, and the wind moves softer, less like a force and more like a witness. The events of the day had left. The ranch different. Not broken. Not disturbed. Just changed. Claire stood alone near the corral fence, where the land opened wide into darkness. The last of the workers had gone inside. Lantern light flickered faintly through the ranch house windows behind her. She didn't go. Not yet. Her thoughts were still tangled in the visit, in the names she hadn't spoken for so long, in the life she had refused to return to, and in something else. Ethan Cole. Behind her, footsteps approached slowly. No urgency. No hesitation. Didn't turn immediately. She already knew who was Ethan. Stopped a few feet away. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind passed between them, carrying the sound of distant horses shifting in their sleep. Finally he said, They're gone. Claire nodded. Slightly. I know. Silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was waiting. Ethan looked out across the dark fields. You could have left with them, he said. It wasn't a challenge. It was a fact he was turning over. Claire's voice came quietly. Yes. Another pause. Then he asked, Why didn't you? That question lingered longer than the others had. Claire's fingers tightened slightly at her side, then relaxed again. I've spent most of my life leaving places, she said, running before things could catch up to me, before I had to explain myself, before I had to belong anywhere. She exhaled slowly. This is the first place where I didn't feel like I had to run immediately. Ethan didn't respond right away. That answer meant more than he expected. He turned slightly toward her. You don't trust it, he said. It wasn't a question. Claire met his gaze briefly. No, she admitted. I don't. A faint pause passed between them. Then she added, softer, but I also don't want to keep running. That was the first time she said something that wasn't just survival. It was something closer to choice. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, hands resting loosely at his sides. You think staying here is safe? He asked. Claire gave a small, almost honest smile, something rare for her. I don't think anywhere is safe, she said. I think some places just feel less like a battle. That made Ethan look at her more directly, for a long moment. He didn't speak, because he understood that Dot more than he wanted to admit. The ranch behind them was quiet now. The world felt reduced to just the two of them standing under a wide, dark sky. Ethan finally spoke again. You've changed things. Here, he said. Claire looked slightly down. I didn't mean to. I know. A pause. Then he added, neither did I. That made her look up. It was the same words from the storm night, but this time they meant something different. Ethan stepped a little closer, not enough to close distance completely, but enough that the space between them no longer felt like separation. You don't have to decide everything tonight, he said. Claire looked toward the house, then back to him. I already decided something, she replied. He waited. Her voice lowered slightly. I'm not leaving in the morning. That wasn't a promise of forever, but it wasn't temporary anymore. Either. It was the first step away from running. Ethan nodded once. Slowly. Then he said something he didn't usually say to anyone. You can stay here as long as you want. Claire studied him carefully. Even if I don't have answers? She asked. Especially then, he replied. The honesty in his voice didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded final. A long silence. Followed. Not uncomfortable. Not uncertain. Just real. The kind that doesn't need to be filled. Claire looked back out toward the land again. The same land she had arrived on. The same wind. The same sky. But she wasn't the same person anymore. Neither was he. Finally, she spoke softly. Why did you let me stay that first day? She asked. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He looked out across the ranch, then back at her. Because you didn't ask to be saved, he said again. A pause, then quieter. And because I think I needed someone who wasn't pretending either. That landed between them like something honest and unguarded. Claire turned slightly toward him. Now. Not fully closing the distance, but not keeping it either. The space between them no longer felt like caution. It felt like possibility. Ethan spoke. One last time that night,